Raymond Fredrickson had spent 3 years pretending to be ordinary, and he was good at it. Good enough to fool his neighbors, his daughter's teachers, and most days, even himself. But when he pulled into his driveway that Tuesday night and saw the woman sitting on his porch steps in a red sweater, he knew the ordinary life was over. He knew it not because she was beautiful, though she was, and not because she was unexpected, though no one ever visited him unannounced. He knew it because she was not shivering. It was 42 degrees outside. She had been sitting there long enough for the motion light to have cycled on and off 3 times, and she was completely, unnaturally still. People who were cold moved. People who were waiting for help fidgeted and checked their phones and pulled their sleeves down. This woman did none of those things. She just watched him park the car, watched him cut the engine, watched him sit there deciding what to do. And when he finally stepped out, she said the 7 words that confirmed everything he had feared for 3 years. The encryption breaks at dawn, Raymond. We need to talk. Before we continue, tell us where in the world you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far our stories reach and how they resonate across the globe. Raymond Fredrickson was not always a single father in a quiet suburb with a modest house and a predictable routine. 3 years before that Tuesday night, he had been one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the country. Not just respected, but sought after. Hospitals flew him in for cases other surgeons had already given up on. Medical journals published his techniques before he was 40. He had a reputation for having the steadiest hands in any operating room he entered. And more importantly, he had a reputation for never losing a patient he had personally taken on. That last part was a piece of his identity he had built everything else around. It was also the piece that someone had deliberately destroyed. The incident that ended his career happened on a Thursday afternoon in March, 3 years ago, in the operating theater of Meridian Children's Hospital in Chicago. The patient was a 7-year-old girl named Callie Marsh, and she was supposed to survive. Raymond had reviewed her case file 4 times. He had performed the same procedure 11 times before with 0 fatalities. He had slept 8 hours the night before, eaten a full breakfast, and arrived at the hospital 90 minutes early to go over every detail with his team. Everything about that surgery was supposed to be routine. Instead, Callie Marsh died on the table 40 minutes in, and the official report said it was because the lead surgeon, Raymond, had used a contaminated instrument tray. Raymond knew that was a lie the moment he read it. He had personally verified the sterilization log that morning. He had checked the tray himself. The contamination had not been there when he opened the instrument packaging. It had been introduced afterward, deliberately, by someone in that operating room. But he could not prove it, and by the time he tried, the hospital's legal team had already framed the narrative. The medical board had already opened a misconduct investigation, and 2 members of his own surgical team had already given statements that gently, carefully, and thoroughly placed the blame at his feet. He lost his license within 6 months. He lost his wife, who had already been leaving him before the incident, within 8. The only thing he did not lose was his daughter, Mara, who was 9 years old and had no idea why her father had stopped going to work. He moved them to Davenport, Iowa, because it was far from Chicago and because no one there knew his name. He got a job doing medical transcription from home, which paid enough and required nothing from him emotionally. He enrolled Mara in a good school, bought a house with a smart home security system because old instincts do not disappear just because a man is pretending to be ordinary, and he spent 3 years being very, very careful not to think too hard about what had actually happened in that operating room. He thought about it anyway, of course. He thought about it every single day. So when Angela Smith sat down across from him at his kitchen table that Tuesday night and told him she was from a medical foundation called Caduceus Group, Raymond did not believe her. He let her talk because he needed information, and because the fastest way to get information from a person is to let them believe they are in control of the conversation. She was good at presenting herself. She had credentials, a business card, a foundation ID, even a printed letter on official letterhead. She had a story about a whistleblower in critical condition who needed an emergency surgical procedure that only someone with Raymond's specific expertise could perform. She had sympathy in her voice and urgency in her eyes, and if Raymond had been any other man, it might have worked. But Raymond was not any other man. He was a surgeon who had spent 3 years reviewing every detail of his own destruction, and he recognized the Caduceus group the moment she said the name, not from her card. From a memo he found buried in his case file 18 months after his license was revoked. A memo he was never supposed to have seen that referenced Caduceus Group as a risk management contractor for Meridian Children's Hospital. He had not known what that meant at the time. He had assumed it was an insurance term. He understood now, sitting across from Angela Smith in his kitchen while his daughter slept upstairs. That was not an insurance term at all. He kept his face neutral. This was something surgeons learned, how to keep their expression professional and calm even when what they were looking at was frightening. He asked Angela to explain the case. He asked about the patient's vitals, the nature of the procedure, the timeline. She answered everything smoothly and quickly, which told him she had prepared thoroughly. She was not improvising. This had been planned, which meant Raymond had been chosen specifically, which meant someone knew exactly where he was and had known for some time. That thought was cold and unpleasant, and he filed it away to deal with later. Then he asked her a question she had not prepared for. He asked her the name of the attending physician who had referred the case to the Caduceus Group. She paused, just briefly, just a fraction of a second, and Raymond saw it. A person who is telling the truth does not pause before giving a name. A person who is constructing a lie selects one from a pre-approved list. Angela selected Dr. Harmon Valles, which was a real name. Raymond even recognized it vaguely. But the pause had already told him everything he needed to know. He said very calmly that he would need a few minutes to review her documentation. He got up, poured 2 glasses of water, set one in front of her, and sat back down. While she reached for the glass, he slid his phone beneath the table and typed a short message to the only person he trusted with his actual location, a man named Carl Dutton, a former hospital administrator who had quietly helped Raymond gather documents after the Meridian incident. The message said, "Caduceus Group is here. Going dark. Watch Mara's school tomorrow." He sent it, put the phone away, and looked at Angela Smith with the same calm, professional expression he had been wearing for the last 20 minutes. Angela put the glass down, looked at him directly, and dropped the foundation story entirely. She told him the truth, or at least a version of it that was closer to the truth than what she had started with. She told him that the Caduceus Group was indeed a risk management firm, and that their primary client for the past decade had been Meridian Health Systems, which was the parent corporation of Meridian Children's Hospital. She told him that 3 years ago, Meridian had been in the middle of covering up a systemic sterilization failure across 4 of their hospital facilities, a failure that had already caused 14 patient deaths that had been quietly classified as complications. She told him that Callie Marsh had been the 15th, and that the contaminated instrument tray that killed her had not been an accident and had not been Raymond's fault. It had been introduced deliberately, as she put it, to create a liability anchor, a named, credentialed individual whose documented failure could absorb any future investigation into Meridian sterilization practices. Raymond listened to all of this without moving. His hands were flat on the table. His breathing was steady. He was, in the language of his old profession, in a controlled state. Inside, he was experiencing something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but was a combination of both that had no clean name. He had known for 3 years that he had been framed. Hearing it confirmed by the person who had helped frame him was a different kind of knowing entirely. Then Angela told him the part that changed everything. She told him that the person who had physically introduced the contamination into his instrument tray, the person who had been inside that operating room with him and had done this deliberately while a 7-year-old girl lay open on the table, was not a nameless Caduceus operative or stranger. It was a member of his own surgical team. And the reason she was telling him this now, 3 years later, was not because she felt guilty. It was because that person had recently stolen an encrypted data drive containing Meridian's complete internal record of the sterilization cover-up, and the Caduceus Group needed Raymond to help them get it back before it reached the federal whistleblower office at 6 o'clock the following morning. Raymond said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked her one question. He asked her who had been inside that operating room. Angela looked at him across the table. And for the first time since she had sat down, her composed professional expression shifted into something that Raymond could only describe as carefully calculated guilt. She told him it had been her. Raymond had imagined this moment before. Not this exact version of it. not Angela Smith at his kitchen table, but the moment of knowing for certain who had done what to him and why. He had imagined it would feel like relief or fury, or the satisfaction of a puzzle finally completing itself. Instead, it felt like being very cold and very clear-headed at the same time, the way the air in an operating theater always fell on the morning of a difficult surgery. It felt like the beginning of work, not the end of waiting. He understood, sitting there looking at Angela, that this was because the knowing was not the important part. The important part was what happened next. Angela did not look away when she told him. That was the first thing he noted. She had the nerve to hold eye contact, which meant she had experience confessing things to people who had reason to want to hurt her. She was also, he noticed, positioned with her back to the wall, and her chair angled slightly toward the kitchen doorway. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that a surgeon who had spent 20 years observing the precise details of human positioning in small rooms would notice. She was ready to move if she needed to. This told Raymond two things. She did not entirely trust whatever backup plan she had arranged outside this house, and she had arranged one. He asked her to tell him about the drive. She told him that the person who had stolen it was a former Caduceus data analyst named Owen Garth, who had spent 2 years quietly copying Meridian's internal documents before packaging them onto a biometric encrypted drive, a device that used live tissue as part of its security architecture, meaning the encryption key was biologically embedded and could only be decrypted by someone with both the technical knowledge to interface with the biolock mechanism and the surgical precision to do so, without destroying the data. Raymond, she said, was the only person outside of Meridian's internal team who had both qualifications. She also told him that Owen Garth was currently in a van parked 1 block from Raymond's house, and that he was not doing well. The biolock on the drive used a small implanted node that interfaced with the carrier's nervous system to generate the decryption key in real time. Owen had implanted it in himself 6 months ago, which had seemed clever at the time, but the node had been manufactured without full regulatory oversight, which was, Raymond thought, a fitting irony given the company involved, and it had been degrading slowly for weeks. Owen was now experiencing neurological symptoms consistent with failing bioimplant, which meant the window to extract both the data and the node safely was narrowing toward zero. If the node failed completely, the encryption would collapse and the drive would self-corrupt. If Raymond did not perform the extraction before dawn, there would be nothing left to take to the federal office and nothing left to hold over Meridian. Raymond asked her why she was helping Meridian get the drive back, if she was the one who had just confirmed that Meridian was responsible for 14 deaths. Angela told him that she was not helping Meridian. She was helping herself. The drive contained records that implicated her directly, and she needed them either destroyed or controlled before they reached federal prosecutors. She was, she said, offering Raymond a trade, help her retrieve the data, and she would give him the full documented evidence of what had been done to him in that operating room, evidence that would restore his license and expose Meridian without exposing her. Raymond noted that this was the kind of offer that sounded generous until you examined exactly what the other person stood to gain. He told her he needed to see Owen before he agreed to anything. This was partly true. He genuinely needed to assess the patient's condition, and partly a way to get a look at what was parked outside his house. Angela texted someone and told him a team member would bring Owen to the door. Raymond stood up, went to his front window, and looked out. The van she had mentioned was there, a dark blue cargo van with no markings, parked under the one streetlight on his block that had been out for the past 2 weeks. He had reported that streetlight to the city 3 times. He now suspected it had not burned out on its own. 2 men brought Owen Garth to Raymond's door. Owen was in his late 30s, lean in the way people become when they've been under sustained physical stress, and he was walking with the careful, deliberate movements of someone whose coordination was not entirely reliable. His left hand had a slight tremor. His eyes were tracking correctly, but a beat slow. Raymond had seen these symptoms before, not from bioimplant failure, but from certain types of progressive neurological compression. He did not say this out loud. He stepped back from the door and let them bring Owen inside. He sent the 2 men back to the van. Angela started to object, and Raymond told her, in the tone he used to use with hospital administrators who questioned his operating procedures, that he did not perform surgery with an audience and he was not going to start tonight. Angela looked at him for a moment, then nodded once and told him her people would be watching every exit. Raymond said he understood, which was true. He set Owen up in the living room, on the couch, with the floor lamp pulled close for light. He went to his hall closet and took out a black case that looked, to anyone who did not know what they were looking at, like an expensive hobby kit. It was not. Raymond had kept it since before his license was revoked, and he had kept it maintained and stocked the same way a retired soldier might keep a weapon cleaned and loaded, not out of expectation, but out of discipline. Inside the case were 12 instruments, 3 scalpels of different gauges, 2 retractors, a set of microforceps, a nerve stimulator, 4 types of suture, and a biointerface probe that he had modified himself over the past 18 months, using components he had ordered individually from 6 different medical supply vendors. He had not told himself why he was building it. He knew now. He examined Owen thoroughly. The implant node was positioned in the brachial plexus region of Owen's left shoulder, an unusual placement, which Raymond suspected Owen had chosen, because it was accessible for self-implantation, but would be difficult for anyone else to extract without causing nerve damage. It was, Raymond thought, the choice of someone who was clever, but not medically trained. The node itself was a cylinder approximately 2 centimeters long and half a centimeter in diameter, and based on the imaging that Angela produced from a tablet. Imaging that had clearly been done recently and professionally, which meant the Caduceus group had more medical resources than they were presenting. It had rotated approximately 15 degrees from its original axis, which was what was causing the neurological compression. Raymond told Owen what he was going to do and what Owen would feel during each stage. This was something he had always done with patients, even unconscious ones, because he believed that the act of explaining kept the surgeon honest and precise. Owen listened, nodded, and then told Raymond something that Angela had not mentioned. He told Raymond that the drive was not the only thing he had. He had a secondary archive, a complete copy of Meridian's communications with Caduceus Group, including specific directives related to the Cali Marsh incident, stored on a remote server, accessible only through a code that was currently memorized in Owen's head and nowhere else. Owen said he was telling Raymond this not as a bargaining chip, but because if he did not survive the extraction, he wanted Raymond to be the one who decided what happened to that archive. He said he had read Raymond's case file 2 years ago when he first began building his own, and that he had understood immediately that Raymond was not at fault. He said he was sorry. Raymond told him to stop talking and lie still. He began the procedure at 11:47 at night. He worked by the floor lamp and by the light of a secondary LED. He clipped to his own shirt collar, and he worked with the same focused quiet he had always brought to an operating table. His hands did not shake. They had never shaken. Not in 20 years of surgery, not during the Cali Marsh operation, and not now. The steadiness was not something he had cultivated. It was simply how he was built, the same way some people had perfect pitch or exceptional spatial memory. He had always been grateful for it. Tonight, he was especially grateful. The extraction took 41 minutes. The node came free cleanly, with no additional nerve damage and with the biointerface connection intact, which meant the decryption key sequence was preserved. Raymond placed it in a sterile container from his kit, closed Owen's incision with 7 sutures. Clean, even, and small enough that they would barely scar, and sat back on his heels. Owen let out a long, slow breath. The tremor in his left hand was already less pronounced. Raymond looked at the node in the container. It was smaller than he had expected. Smaller than an AA battery, translucent on one end where the biointerface filament was still extended. It looked like something from a science fiction film. It also looked, he thought, like leverage. He had been thinking about Angela's offer for the past 41 minutes. He had also been thinking about the 2 men in the van outside, and about the specific kind of organization that plants a streetlight outage before a visit and stations operatives at every exit of a house. He had been thinking about his daughter, asleep upstairs, whose bedroom window he had checked the lock on twice since Angela arrived. And he had been thinking about a question that Angela had not answered and had not appeared to notice he had not asked. How long had she known where he was? He stood up, put the node carefully in his shirt pocket, and went to wake his daughter. Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, You'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. Mara Fredrickson was 12 years old and had inherited from her father the particular quality of waking up completely, without confusion or grogginess, the moment she was disturbed. Raymond sat on the edge of her bed, put his hand on her shoulder, and when her eyes opened, he spoke quietly and directly because he had always spoken to her that way. He told her that some people had come to the house and that she needed to get dressed and put her go-bag in her closet by the window, and that she should not turn on any lights and should not make any sounds. He told her this was not a drill. Mara looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, then got up and did what he said. He had never told her explicitly why they kept go-bags, or why it taught her the house's alarm bypass codes, or why she knew 3 different routes to the neighbor's house 2 streets over where Carl Dutton's sister lived. He had simply taught her these things the way he had been taught to check instrument trays, because preparation was not pessimism. It was professionalism. He went back downstairs. Angela was standing in the kitchen, no longer sitting, which meant she had been moving around the house while he was in the living room. He noted this without reacting. Owen was still on the couch, conscious and quiet. Raymond sat across from Angela and told her it was time to talk about the actual exchange. He told her that he had the node, that the extraction had been successful, and that the decryption key was intact. He also told her that before he handed anything over, he needed to understand a complete picture of what she intended to do with the data. Angela told him that she intended to destroy the portions that implicated her and deliver the rest to a private legal team who would use it to negotiate a settlement with Meridian on behalf of a silent coalition of affected families. She presented this as altruism. Raymond presented it back to her as what it actually was, which was a private financial arrangement that would keep everything out of federal court and ensure that no one went to prison, including Angela. She did not deny this. Raymond told her he had a counter-proposal. He was going to hold on to the node and make one phone call, and if the answer to that phone call was what he expected, he was going to walk out of this house with his daughter and Owen Garth, and Angela's people in the van outside were not going to stop him. Angela told him, pleasantly, that was not how this was going to go. Raymond told her he thought she should hear the counter-proposal before she committed to a position. He picked up his phone and called Carl Dutton. Carl answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake and waiting. Raymond told him 3 words, activate the archive, and hung up. Angela stared at him. Raymond explained, in the same calm tone he used for everything, that Owen was not the only person who had been building a case against Meridian for the past 2 years. Raymond had been building one too, not because he had expected it to come to this. He had not entirely. But because the habit of documentation was deep in him, and because the question of what had actually happened to Callie Marsh had never let him sleep. Over the past 2 years, Raymond had quietly acquired and archived 17 documents related to Meridian's sterilization scandal. He had done this legally, through freedom of information requests, through contact with the medical board, and through one former Meridian employee who had reached out to him anonymously 18 months ago, and provided internal safety memos that he had never been able to fully contextualize until tonight. Carl Dutton had been holding a complete copy of this archive on a secure server, with instructions to forward it to a specific federal investigator, a real one, a name Raymond had verified. If Raymond used the activation phrase, the archive was now in motion. Raymond had approximately 2 hours before it arrived. Angela was quiet for a moment. Raymond watched her process this. She was fast. He could see her running through options and eliminating them with the efficiency of someone who had been in difficult rooms before. Then she said something he had not expected. She told him that the node he had extracted was not the actual decryption key for the drive. It was a decoy. The real key was biological, and it was not inside Owen Garth. Raymond looked at her, and she looked back at him, and she told him that she was the courier. She had been carrying Meridian's complete internal record embedded in her own tissue for the past 3 months, and she was currently dying from the slow failure of the biointerface. She had not come to Raymond's house to retrieve Owen's drive. She had come because she needed Raymond to get the data out of her before it killed her, and because he was the only person she had found who could do it and who she could manipulate into doing it. Raymond sat very still. He understood now the whole shape of the thing, not as it had been presented to him in stages over the past several hours, but as it had actually been designed from the beginning. Angela had not come to his house because the Caduceus group sent her. She had come despite them. She was dying. She was in possession of enough information to destroy both Meridian and the Caduceus group entirely, and she had spent weeks constructing a scenario that would get Raymond alone in a room with her without him knowing why, because she knew he would not have come willingly. She had used Owen as a practical first step, genuine in his condition and his data, but also serving as proof of concept, as a way to get Raymond's hands working and his clinical mind engaged before she told him the truth. She had engineered every piece of this, including the confession about Callie Marsh, because she needed him emotionally present and not just technically compliant. He hated that it had mostly worked. He also noted, for the second time in one night, that Angela Smith was not a person who did ordinary things. He asked her where the implant was located. She told him. He asked her how long she had been experiencing symptoms. She told him that too. Her answers were precise and factually consistent with the timeline she described. And her effect when she described her symptoms was a controlled understatement of someone who was frightened but determined not to show it. Raymond was familiar with this particular kind of courage. He had seen it in patients who were 9 years old and in patients who were 90. He did not particularly want to feel respect for Angela Smith at this moment. He felt it anyway. He asked her one more question. He asked her why she had told him the truth about Callie Marsh if she needed him cooperative, and the truth was the thing most likely to make him uncooperative. Angela was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she had been living with what she had done for 3 years, and that she had made a decision at some point in the past months when she understood she was probably going to die from this, that she was not going to die having lied to every single person she had hurt. She said this flatly, without performance. Raymond did not know whether to believe it completely. He believed it enough. He opened his kit again. He also, while preparing, sent a second message to Carl Dutton. This message was longer and more specific, and it contained Owen Garth's verbal description of the remote server archive, the code, the access sequence, and the name of the federal contact Owen had designated. It took Raymond 4 minutes to type it, while appearing to be reviewing Angela's imaging on the tablet. When it was sent, he put his phone away and told Angela to sit down and be still. The second procedure was more complex than the first. Angela's implant was deeper, positioned in a location that reflected both technical sophistication and a willingness to endure considerable pain during implantation, and the surrounding tissue showed the early markers of an inflammatory response that had been building for weeks. Raymond worked methodically. He did not rush and he did not slow down. He thought about nothing except the work, which was the only way he had ever been able to perform at the level he performed at, not by suppressing everything else, but by making the work large enough to fill every available space in his attention. It took 63 minutes. The implant came free, without rupture. The data integrity, when Angela checked the interface signal on her tablet, was complete. Raymond sutured her incision with the same precision he had used on Owen, and when he finished, he cleaned his instruments, closed his kit, and sat down on the floor of his own living room because the adrenaline of the past hours had finally begun to metabolize and his legs had an opinion about it. He looked at Angela, who was pale and very quiet. He looked at Owen, who had fallen asleep on the couch. Outside, the van was still there. The two men in it did not know yet what had happened inside this house. They would soon. Raymond needed to move before they were contacted or became impatient. He stood up, picked up the kit, and went upstairs to get his daughter. Mara was ready. She was dressed in dark clothes with her go bag on her back and her shoes already tied, sitting on her bed in the dark with the patience of a child who had spent her whole life trusting her father's judgment, even when he did not explain it. When Raymond appeared in the doorway, she stood up without being asked. He told her they were going to go out the back and walk 3 blocks north, and that she should not speak until they were out of the yard. She nodded. He had never been more grateful for her in his life, which was saying something significant, because he was always grateful for her. He went back downstairs. He told Owen he was strong enough to walk, and that he needed to do so now. Owen got up slowly and did it. Raymond told Angela that she had a choice. She could come with him, or she could stay and explain the situation to the men in the van, who he suspected were not going to be pleased about the last several hours. He said this without malice, and without particular sympathy. He meant it as a factual presentation of her options. Angela looked at him for a moment, then picked up her bag and stood. He brought all three of them out through the kitchen door, into the backyard, through the gate in the fence that he had specifically built to open silently on well-oiled hinges, because old instincts do not disappear just because a man is pretending to be ordinary. The yard behind is backed onto an alley. The alley led north. 3 blocks north was a 24-hour gas station where Raymond had arranged, in a text conversation conducted in the kitchen, while appearing to review documentation, for Carl Dutton's contact in Davenport, a woman named Teresa, who drove a green Subaru and asked no questions, to meet them. He walked his daughter and 2 near strangers through the dark and the cold of an Iowa morning, carrying a surgical kit in one hand and a stolen encrypted biodrive in the other. And he thought about the fact that he had spent 3 years trying to disappear and had spent this night doing everything he knew how to do. He thought this was probably information about himself that he should not have taken 3 years to accept. Teresa was at the gas station. She had 2 thermoses of coffee and no questions, as promised. Mara got into the back seat and fell asleep within 10 minutes in the way that children can manage even in the middle of catastrophe. Raymond sat in the front passenger seat. Owen and Angela sat in the back with Mara between them, and the 4 of them drove east out of Davenport while the sky in front of them began, imperceptibly, to lighten. Raymond spent the drive thinking about what came next, which was a part he had not fully worked out, because he had not known, until approximately 2 hours ago, what all the pieces actually were. He knew now. He went through it methodically, the way he went through a preoperative checklist, identifying each element and its relationship to the others. The archive that Carl had sent to the federal investigator contained 17 documents establishing Meridian Health System's systematic falsification of sterilization records across 4 hospital facilities over 6 years. It did not, on its own, contain direct evidence linking the Callie Marsh incident to a deliberate act by a specific individual. It was damaging to Meridian as a corporation, but it was not sufficient to restore Raymond's license or address a specific case without additional corroboration. Owen's remote archive, now in Carl's possession, contained Meridian's internal communications with the Caduceus Group, which included a specific directive related to the Callie Marsh case. This was direct evidence of a deliberate act. It named people. It named Angela. It also named 3 Meridian executives who had authorized what the communication delicately called liability anchoring as a risk management strategy. This archive, combined with Raymond's 17 documents, create a complete picture. The implant data, currently in the sterile container in Raymond's kit, contained Meridian's full internal record of the cover-up, which was the most comprehensive piece of all. It was also, Raymond noted, the piece that Angela needed to control. She needed it either destroyed, the portions that implicated her, or secured somewhere that gave her negotiating power with Meridian. She had told him this at the beginning of the night, when she was still pretending to represent the Caduceus Group, and it was, he suspected, the most honest thing she had said before the truth. He turned around and looked at Angela in the back seat. She was awake, leaning against the car door, her color better than it had been an hour ago. He told her that he was going to make her an offer, and that unlike the offer she had made him, it was not conditional on anything she could verify or deny. He was going to give the implant data to the federal investigator, along with Owen's archive and his own. All of it. Every piece. He was not going to negotiate a private settlement, and he was not going to allow any portion of the evidence to be controlled by any private party, including himself. Angela looked at him and asked what that meant for her specifically. Raymond told her that he did not know. That would depend on what the investigators found, what prosecutors decided, and what Angela chose to do with whatever cooperation she chose to offer. He told her that he had spent 3 years being the person that a criminal act was done to, and that he was not willing to spend the next 3 years being the person who decided how crime was punished, because that was not his job and had never been his job. His job was surgery, and what he had spent the night doing was the surgical equivalent of removing everything diseased and infected and leaving the clean work to heal on its own. Angela was quiet for a long time. The car moved through the flat, dark landscape of the Iowa morning. Then she said that she had known, when she planned this, that he might do exactly what he was doing, and that she had come anyway because she did not actually have a choice. She had been dying. She had been alone with the knowledge of what she had done. She had needed someone with steady hands, and he was the only one she had ever seen hold a scalpel without trembling. She said this without asking for anything in return, and Raymond understood that she was not apologizing. Apology was too small a word for something too large. But that she was explaining, which was what people did when they had finally run out of other options. He turned back to the front. The sky was definitely lighter now. It was not yet sunrise, but the horizon had that deep blue quality that meant the dark was losing ground. Raymond thought about Callie Marsh. He thought about her the way he always thought about her, directly, without flinching, the same way he faced everything he could not change. She had been 7 years old, and she had died on his table, and it had not been his fault, and it also could not be undone. The truth coming out would not undo it. Meridian's exposure would not undo it. His license being restored would not give Callie Marsh back to her parents. He understood this. He had understood it for 3 years. The truth mattered anyway. It mattered because 15 families deserved to know what had happened to their children, and because medical institutions that killed patients and hid it were dangerous to every patient who came after, and because Raymond Fredrickson had spent his career believing that the most important thing a surgeon did was not the surgery itself, but the commitment to not look away when something went wrong. He had been forced to look away 3 years ago. He was not going to do it again. Carl Dutton met them at a motel in the town of Bettendorf, 20 minutes east of Davenport, at 5:15 in the morning. He brought food, clean clothes for Mara, and the contact information for federal investigator who had, Carl reported, already acknowledged receipt of the first archive, and was currently in communication with her supervisors. Carl looked at Angela and Owen with the expression of a man who had many questions, and had decided that this was not the moment for them. Raymond appreciated this about Carl. They stayed in Bettendorf for 4 days. Raymond did not tell Mara everything that had happened, but he told her enough, more than he had ever told her about their life, and why it was structured the way it was. She was 12 years old, and she listened carefully and asked 2 questions, both of them practical. He answered them honestly. She seemed to process the information the way she processed most things, thoroughly and without drama, and then she asked if she could have a television remote. Raymond gave it to her. On the 5th day, Raymond met with a federal investigator in a conference room in a federal building in Chicago. He brought the implant data, his personal archive, and Owen Garth, who sat beside him and said very little beyond confirming the technical specifications of his own documentation. The investigator was a woman in her late 40s named Claudette Marsh, and Raymond understood when she introduced herself that her last name was not a coincidence. She was Callie Marsh's aunt. She had been working this case from the federal side for over a year. She and Raymond looked at each other across the conference table for a moment that was longer than the standard professional pause. And then they got to work. The investigation that followed was not fast, because federal investigations never were. But it was thorough, because Claudette Marsh made sure of it. Meridian Health Systems was placed under federal oversight within 6 weeks. 4 executives were indicted before the end of the year. The Caduceus Group was dissolved as a legal entity, and its principals faced both civil and criminal proceedings. Angela Smith cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced exposure that kept her out of prison, but required complete disclosure and a civil settlement with the families of all 15 patients. Owen Garth received formal whistleblower protections and a financial award that he said he intended to use to pay for the medical training he wished he had gotten before he started implanting things in himself. Raymond's medical license was restored on a Tuesday, 11 months after the night Angela sat on his porch. He found out by email, which struck him as an anticlimactic delivery mechanism for something he had been waiting 3 years for. He read the email twice, sitting at the kitchen table of a different house in a different city, and then he closed his laptop and went to pick up Mara from school. She asked him on the way home if it was official yet. He told her yes. She said good in the tone of someone who had never really doubted it. And then she told him about her day. He started operating again 3 months later. Not at a major research hospital, not in a teaching position, not with the career architecture he had built before. He started at a regional children's hospital in a mid-sized city, doing the same procedures he had always done, with a small team that he trained himself in the things he cared about. He checked every instrument tray personally before every surgery. He always had. He always would. The steadiness in his hands had never left him. It had simply been waiting, as things with genuine roots always waited for the conditions to return to what they needed to be. And when they did, It resumed without ceremony, quiet, precise, and completely without tremor, the way it had always been, the way it would always be. Raymond Fredrickson was not a man who had been broken by what had been done to him and then repaired. He was a man who had absorbed the full weight of it and come out the other side with every essential piece of himself intact. He had known that the whole time. It had simply taken an encrypted drive, a dying woman in a red sweater, and 63 minutes of surgery on his own living room floor for everyone else to find out. The story of Raymond Fredrickson teaches that integrity is not something that circumstances can permanently take from a person. It can be suppressed, buried, and forced into hiding, but it does not disappear. Raymond lost his career, his reputation, and his place in the world he had built. Yet he never lost the discipline, the precision, and the moral clarity that made him exceptional in the first place. The lesson is that the people who wrong us often count on us staying broken, because a broken person is manageable and a whole one is not. Raymond became dangerous to those who destroyed him not by becoming vengeful or reckless, but by remaining exactly who he had always been, careful, steady, and committed to the truth even when the truth was costly. The story also shows that cover-ups are not permanent solutions, but delayed reckonings, because every hidden wrong leaves evidence somewhere, in documents, in memories, in the bodies of the people who carried the secret, and the longer it is hidden, the more catastrophic the uncovering becomes. Most importantly, Raymond's story is a reminder that the quiet life a person builds after a great loss is not necessarily a lesser life. Sometimes it is simply the place where a person goes to remember who they are before they return to prove it. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My friend said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?